Why did your traffic drop following a redesign? Traffic drops are actually, unfortunately, very common following a redesign, and I will just say that traffic drops are actually common even after successfully completed redesigns. The reason for this is that redesigns are risky. You're making a lot of changes to your website all at once. So when Google's bots go through and look at your website and they see that all these things changed, Google has to reevaluate your website and determine if your website still should rank in search results or not. And while Google is going through that reevaluation process, you're going to see a drop in rankings and a drop in traffic. Now, there are some ways that you can manage this risk and hopefully see less of a drop after a redesign on your website. To think through the different ways of handling the risk of a redesign, let's talk about the different kinds of redesigns that you can do. One type of redesign, and usually the least risky type of redesign, is a reskin. With a reskin, you're changing the look and feel of your website. You're changing the fonts, the images, the colors, maybe your logo is updating, but the underlying structure of the website, how the pages are organized, what's in the navigation, what the URLs are, and also the code used to generate the website, that all remains the same. It's really just the look and the feel, the skin of the website that's changing. This is usually not very disruptive for Google because the content itself isn't changing, so there's not much that Google needs to reevaluate. You can definitely see a traffic drop after a reskin, but it's usually not as bad as other types of a redesign. Where a reskin gets a little bit riskier is when it comes to the page experience factors that Google is looking at. So things like mobile friendliness. Maybe the new look and feel of the website has some kind of issue that prompts Google to say, this doesn't look as mobile friendly as it used to, and you might see some mobile friendliness issues start to come up. Similarly, with a new design, a new reskin of your website, you might see speed issues. Maybe something about the new CSS file that you've written for the new skin of the website is larger and it slows down the website. That's a reskin. Now, another type of redesign is a redevelopment. A redevelopment comes with a little bit more risk because a redevelopment means that you're changing something about the underlying code of your website. So this could be moving your website to a new platform. You're moving from WordPress to Shopify. And when you move to a new platform or you're changing something about the nature of your code, you're changing quite a bit about how Google's bots are interacting with your website. Now, one of the biggest changes that can happen within a redevelopment is the URL changes. This can happen when you move to a new CMS. If you're moving from WordPress to Webflow, your URLs are probably going to have to change. Now, you can minimize some of the risk by implementing redirects. Redirect takes Google bots and all the other people who are visiting your site from the old URL over to the new URL. And that's great. You should implement redirects. But for every single redirect you implement, Google has to follow that redirect and update their records to the new URL. So if you're redirecting thousands of pages all at once, Google has to go through and reevaluate all of those thousands of different pages and figure out what the new URL is, update their database, and update their rankings accordingly. And during that process of updating their database and reevaluating everything and looking at everything, Googlebot may decide to change some of their decisions that they've made before about where this content should rank in search results. So you might see a drop in rankings and traffic as a result. What I typically recommend is do your best to not change URLs unless you absolutely have to. And for any truly critical content, the content that's driving a lot of your traffic and conversions on your website, really try very hard not to change those URLs at all. If you do change the URL, be ready for the time that it takes Google to reevaluate that content and know your traffic is going to drop through that. Now, the other thing that can change with a redevelopment is how the website is rendered. So rendering means how the content is output to the browser. If you're moving from a static setup where the content is delivered server-side, so it's delivered from the server directly to the browser, and you're moving from that to a client-side rendering setup where the content is actually loaded by the browser, so this would be moving from something like WordPress to a React-based website. That can really change how Google's bots see your content, how they see the things that are loaded on your website. And if Google has to change how they're processing your website because your website is now rendering differently, you're going to see some disruptions while they go through that. Here again, you want to make sure that as part of the redevelopment, you do everything you possibly can to make sure that your new website is rendered in a way that Google can see it. But do know that Google will need time to figure that out. And while they're figuring that out, you can see drops in your traffic. Now, the last type of redesign that you can do is a restructuring of your website. And this is probably the riskiest type of redesign. With a restructuring, you're changing your website's content, you're changing your website's hierarchy, you're changing your website's navigation, you're purposefully changing something about the fundamental pieces and parts of your website. And with this, Google has to go through and reread all of your content. They have to look at your navigation. They have to look at your website's new hierarchy and decide what's changed. Have the topics that you're talking about changed? Has the way you're talking about those topics changed in a way where you're no longer an authority on this website? Or maybe you're now more of an authority because of how you changed the website's hierarchy and navigation. Whatever you did, though, to change the content, to change the structure of your website, Google has to reevaluate that. And this can be a longer reevaluation period for Google to go through. And during that time, you're probably going to see a drop in traffic and rankings. And potentially, after Google goes through and reevaluates your content and looks at your content, you're not going to come out as well on the other side of it if something didn't go quite right with how you made that change. The best way to handle this type of risk that comes from a restructure is to roll out the restructure in phases. Don't roll it all out at once. Now, that can be hard to do from a practical standpoint, so if you have to roll it out all at once, just know that that is the riskier setup. But ideally, you can roll this out in phases. Update certain pages, see what Google does. Update your navigation, see what Google does. Make some changes to your website's hierarchy, see what Google does. Remove some pages from your website, redirect some pages, consolidate pages, whatever other structural changes you're making to your content, do those in phases. That way you're giving Google a chance to reevaluate a phase or a portion of those updates at any given time, and that might be a little bit easier for you to get through. It will also be easier to know which of those changes might actually be a problem for Google. If you are facing a traffic drop or a rankings drop following a redesign and need help figuring out why that is or what you need to do, or if you're about to embark on some type of redesign and need help mitigating these risks in advance, please let me know. You can email me at matthew@elementive.com. If you found this video helpful and would like to see more like it, please subscribe. Thank you for watching.